Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the GD Report. I'm G, and
I am D.
tonight we have a special guest with us, and we have a great topic. And so, D, why don't you tell us a little bit about both of those?
All right, absolutely. Well, we're super excited to have Dr. Jeff Birdsong with us. He is the Department Chair of Liberal Arts at Northeastern Oklahoma A&M College in Miami, Oklahoma. And
Isn't that your hometown, D?
That's very close to my hometown. I'm actually from Commerce, Oklahoma. And anyone who knows that area, G, which obviously you don't, knows that Commerce is a long way from Miami. It's about 7 miles, but it's a different side of the tracks. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me, D and G. Really enjoy your podcast.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Well, we are going to talk about what on paper doesn't sound like that interesting of a topic, but when you get into it, it actually is a really fascinating topic. Article 2, Section 1 of our Constitution highlights how we actually elect a president of the United States. And a lot of people think, hey, when we go to the polls, we're going to go and we're going to vote for Donald Trump or we're going to vote for Joe Biden. But in reality, you're actually voting for electors who will then be chosen to go vote in the Electoral College. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Electoral College, the way it's come into play in some past elections, and talk about how it could come into play this year. So some interesting topics with that. So G-Man, any other background before we jump off?
Well, I just, there was a Supreme Court case that came into play last year where a Colorado elector wanted to change his vote, and the state of Colorado sued him, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't really do that. So
yeah, absolutely. So Jeff, why don't you give us a little bit of your thoughts kind of overall on the Electoral College?
Sure. I really think it's great that you guys are talking about this, and it is pretty amazing in a way that we still have the Electoral College. I was just listening to Joseph Ellis wrote a book called The American Sphinx about Thomas Jefferson. And he would say that if Jefferson was back here walking around, he would just say, "You're kidding me. You guys are still using the Electoral College. How is that you're still using something like that?" I mean, that was something they came up with a conclusion and said, the people at the Constitutional Convention, let's go with this. This is surely they'll come up with something better than this. Once George Washington is no longer elected, George Mason, one of the delegates at the Constitutional Convention, believed that the Electoral College would never elect somebody else after Washington. And also there was a belief like that you would be going to Congress, House of Representatives, to be electing the president, because so many states would want to put up their own candidate and have several people running, and no one would get enough votes to be able to win.
Yeah.
Probably should have thought about factions more.
Right.
Madison was talking about that, and then they became political parties. And
Right.
so two-party system that pretty well has, in a way, kind of saved the bacon of the Electoral College, that it has worked most of the time. But working means, yes, that it also does mean that there are times in which you have a candidate that loses the popular vote that actually gets elected. And we've seen that twice in the last 16 years.
Well, most Americans don't realize that when the Constitution was enacted, there were no political parties. In fact, John Adams, who lost the election of 1800 because of political parties, I think, he was totally against them. He thought they would be the downfall of America, and eventually he may be proven right on that.
Yeah.
It could very well be. I want to dig in before we talk about Jeff. You alluded to some of the cases where folks had candidates had won the popular vote, but then not won the Electoral College. But before we jump in that, I want to talk a little bit about the roots of the Electoral College, just from a standpoint that there are some a little bit disturbing to me. I don't know if it's disturbing to anybody else, but a little bit disturbing about when you think about the roots, because I know one of the concerns at the Constitutional Convention was how the electors would be chosen, how the election would go, representation. And that's where we ended up with, in our Constitution, the 3/5 rule,
Sure.
where African-American slaves, male slaves, I should point out, were counted as 3/5 of a man. And it's so it was hoped to balance out, because the South felt like that they would never have anybody win the presidency if it was just a straight popular vote.
Yeah, one of the things that I was looking over just some different writings about the Electoral College to kind of refresh my memory before I got up here to talk to you guys. And a really good scholar named George Edwards III has done some really good writing about the Electoral College. And he points out that because of the Electoral College, the constitutional system is trying to make sure that you have a minority that can prevent an action.
Mm-hmm.
But through the Electoral College now, a minority can gain an action. And they can lead an action. So in a way, I don't know, I'm sure I'm not going to have the right comparisons here entirely, but it's not like the minority is the goalie on the hockey team. The minority now can be the center or the right wing, left wing, trying to score, put the biscuit in the basket kind of thing there. And is that really the intent? Is that really the way that you should go for a democracy? Or even a republic, in that case. So we spend so much time focusing on a concern about a tyranny of a majority. What about a tyranny of a minority? And that was certainly, the seeds were there by giving so much authority to the planter class in the Electoral College. And I mean, in some ways, how far they would have been able to take it, don't know, but the idea of saying, well, if we're not going to agree on this, then we're going to walk away from it, and maybe we'll get back in contact with England or go with France or go with Spain, and we're not going to have this country after all. Was that really just some sort of version of blackmail to do that, or would they have really carried it out? Either way, that's what we got. And you would think that we could progress from there. We've progressed in other areas, so why not go that direction? But I think you're probably going to maybe think about this as we talk about what it might mean if we have a bad situation this time around in 2020. But I was looking at some of the background to the 1876 election, where Tilden, and this has happened all four times, just a coincidence, it's been the Democrat candidate that has got more popular vote and lost the electoral vote. So it was Tilden in 1876, and he had plenty of Democrats that were actually saying, forget this, we're not going to go along with this, we have weapons and we're going to do something about this. And he didn't want to go that direction. And this quote I thought was so telling. He goes, "It's better to have Hayes in the White House than to have another civil war."
Wow.
And I just kept thinking of that quote. These last few days, I've been thinking about that quite a bit.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think about that, the tyranny of the minority. I think that's a great phrase, because you think about the way that when we go into electoral season with the presidential politics, there can be national poll after national poll where I've seen Joe Biden recently up as much as 12 points in certain polls. I think it's a little high, but very far ahead nationally, when in reality, the actual state of the race, the campaigns are focused on about 6 or 7 states.
Sure.
Just to try to manipulate that, and just go back to the 3/5 rule. Since it's partially my podcast, I can domineer the conversation a little bit. But
yeah, let's hear it.
The 3/5 rule always really bugs me for a lot of reasons, but it really rankles me, and we're getting ready to go into another Supreme Court confirmation hearing, which drives me crazy. But when I hear the textualist or the constructionist or the people who believe that, the literalist, it's the Constitution is not a living, breathing document. It should be exactly as written, and we should think about the intent of the framers as they wrote the Constitution. I've always wondered about that, and wanted to ask, if I was one of the questioners, wanted to ask if they felt that the 3/5 rule should still be in place today, since they believe the Constitution shouldn't progress and shouldn't change, and we shouldn't adapt as a people.
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The one of the ways I look at the Constitution, and was that a question you want me to answer?
No, I was just, I was laughing at myself because I kind of did a mic drop there and just kind of threw it on you guys.
No, I mean, to me, if the Constitution is not a living document, then that means it's a dead document, and I don't really want to adhere to a dead document. I think it has to be able to adapt. It has to be able to maneuver, and it has to find ways to be flexible to the changes in society. But yeah, try this on for size when you're thinking about tyranny of the minority. We probably are going to get another justice onto the Supreme Court. That will mean 5 of the 6 justices that are conservative justices were picked by Republican presidents that lost the popular vote.
Wow.
Wow, that's an interesting stat.
Yeah. Scary.
Yeah.
So if you extrapolate that just a little bit further, you have to say a majority of the country voted against the person who selected people to our highest court. 5 of the 6.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, there's your way of looking at that. And my gosh, so, I mean, yeah, I don't think we can say that the trade-off here, if you're trying to fight the tyranny of the majority, the trade-off is not to have a tyranny of a minority.
Right.
I mean, it's not a better situation in that case. So, yeah.
Well, and I always, when I hear arguments for keeping the Electoral College, I hear some of my more conservative friends will say things like, well, this is the only way that the votes of smaller states and will be counted. But my counter argument to that is, what about all the people in California who vote and their the fact that millions of people vote there and it's not counted the same weight as a vote somewhere else is, as a vote in Wisconsin or a Georgia or a North Carolina or things like that. So to me, it's like being in Oklahoma, where it's more conservative state. I know that it's 99.9% chance that the conservative candidate's going to carry the state in a presidential election. So in a lot of ways, it discourages people who have a more progressive mind to go vote because they think my vote doesn't count.
Sure.
Which is one of the things I like about living in Colorado, because we truly are a purple state. So since I've lived here, we've had a Republican governor, then we had a terrible Democratic governor, then we had John Hickenlooper. Now we've got a Democratic governor, and the Democrats control the whole state legislature, but it's very close in the state legislature. Even though the Dems control it, they don't have like an overwhelming majority. And in 4 years, it could flip back and the Republicans could take the whole state. We just kind of switch back and forth. And I really think that, for lack of a better term, keeps you honest and keeps government where it needs to be, representing the people, not just one faction of it. One thing I want to ask you, Jeff, do you see ways that the Electoral College, we hear a lot of talk about voter fraud and shenanigans and things like that. Do you see a way for the Electoral College to be manipulated in any way and, basically skewed towards one candidate or another?
I'm not really sure if that could happen. I suppose it could. I mean, right now, the electors are so connected to their political parties that they're, in most cases, going to vote with their party. But, of course, there's that session of time between the November election until they cast their ballots in December. And so if you did have something happen during that time, you could have electors that might make decisions to vote a different way. I think I have this right, that in 1872, one of the more bizarre elections, Horace Greeley ran as a liberal Republican. They didn't even have a Democrat candidate. The Democrats decided to pick him, which he had been anti-Democrat his whole life, and then he's now their candidate. It was really weird. And he died before the electors cast their ballots. So I can't, and he was going to get shellacked anyway, he did, but I can't remember exactly what happened. I think he may have picked up some electoral votes and then they shifted somewhere else or something in that case. But I mean, I suppose there could be ways of, bribing an elector or intimidating an elector. That could certainly happen.
Right.
But I don't know. G, you have something in mind on how they might do that?
Well, first I want to say interesting case there, since we have a town in Colorado named after Mr. Greeley, just a little north of Denver. No, I'm just, there's a news report that just came out today about Pennsylvania and some shenanigans there. Well, maybe that's not the right term, but some things the Republicans are trying to do with their electors there. So I just wondered if it was possible for one party or another to kind of step in and, influence the election in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read the article. I don't know in what way exactly. I'm kind of curious to see about it. Have to look into that, how a Republican legislature could influence Democrat electors.
Right.
But maybe something about how the popular vote breaks down in Pennsylvania, and maybe would want to say that if it's, I'm just speculating here. Let's say if the vote is within 2 or 3%, you have to have only half the electors cast the ballot, and the other half has to go with the other candidate, or finally somehow have a proportional vote of the electors, which that would at least make it a little fair, a little more connected to the voting population if you had a proportional breakdown of the electors.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting possibility, and I think the other big thing that and we may talk about this a little bit later, but is just some of the things that the Trump administration has talked about is with the Postal Service, with the delays on actual counting the ballots, when we will know that they may seek to try to delay the Electoral College meeting, which I believe is constitutionally mandated.
It is.
And then if they could somehow throw it to the House, then there's all kinds of rules as far as the state gets. It's not the exact number of votes. It's like one vote per
delegation, state delegation.
And
Correct.
So then you end up with majority delegations that, even though it's based on population, and so then you end up with a state like an Iowa that may actually have more Democratic Congress people, but the representation is actually more Republican, so they would get one vote and the vote would be a Republican. So I could see some moves in those directions, trying to use the tools that are there. Let's jump into, you mentioned 1876, Jeff. Let's talk about, I know you've got a couple cases of some interesting things that have happened. The election of 1876 being one of those, where the folks who lost the popular vote or won the popular vote actually lost the Electoral College.
Yeah, I think, well, it depends on if you're looking at 1800, and then you could also look at 1824. Both of those did go to the Congress, to the House of Representatives, to elect the president. So then you would look at 1876 as the first time that somebody won the popular vote and lost the Electoral College. And I think, to be fair, in some ways, I'm not an expert on that election, but sure, there are different sets of votes, and it would have happened. And of course, you had Reconstruction going on in the South, so then you're considering who is casting the ballot. You may very well have had at that time where people didn't get what we call the Australian ballot, that is, you know, a secret ballot, and you don't really know how people vote. You had situations where people would show up, and if you had to get the party's ballot, whichever one you wanted, so then they would know how you're going to vote once you got the ballot. So you may have had situations like that in many of those states. But again, from what I understand, that there were some telegraphs that were being sent by Democrat operatives in Florida and Louisiana, suggesting that there wasn't as solid a vote as they thought there was going to be. Some Republican operatives in New York City and some other places got a hold of that. Then they told Hayes not to concede. And so they started challenging the voting outcome down there. And so now you had different sets of votes, different sets of electors. And so long story short on all of that, it, you know, gets down to a commission that's 8-7, 8 Republicans versus 7 Democrats. And of course you have to fit into this point, you know, in a lot of ways. When we look this over, you can say, for a lot of us who are more progressive, we'd say, you know, if I was alive back then, I'd be wanting to vote for the Republicans. They were guys that were certainly more progressive and more for civil rights and all those things. That's true. But after 8 years of U.S. Grant, they were very corrupt. And,
Right.
that
Right now.
Yeah. So that was Tilden's big issue, is to say, you know, I'm going to do some reform here. And that's where I think he was a very attractive candidate. But it also meant for people that were backing Rutherford Hayes, hey, you know, we don't want to give up this gravy train. And so they were willing to do whatever they needed to do to rig that thing. And I mean, I think in a lot of ways that was the case. There was the one deciding vote of the 8-7. It still was like, maybe some people would be willing to go, hey, I'm not going to be just completely partisan here. But during that whole time, one of the justices, there was a justice on the Supreme Court. He had been picked by a Republican, but was generally considered to be pretty neutral. Then he was appointed a senator in his state. And then he was replaced by another justice who was a very partisan Republican. And so there you go. So they got a 7 vote. And
so that was an 8-7 Supreme Court vote that put.
It was an 8-7 electoral commission that had 5 Supreme Court justices, 5 Democrats, and 5 Republicans.
Gotcha.
And most of the Supreme Court justices, I mean, by 1876, I mean, I don't know, the last time you would have had a Democrat in there would have been Buchanan, like up to 1860. I don't know if he appointed any justices or not.
Right,
and
because
what was also known about what now?
I was going to say, because back then Democrats were synonymous with the South, correct?
Sure, yeah. I mean, in a way, what you could, even by 1876, the strategy, I think, for most Democrats, I'm probably not being entirely accurate about this, was like carry the South and get a big vote of the Irish in New York City. There you go. And you might get enough win. And that probably is what helped Grover Cleveland win. He was about the only guy back then that he was the only Democrat in that time to win.
Right.
Yeah, he could end up being a model for if Trump were to lose and actually admit it this time. Trump could come back again in 4 years and try to be Grover Cleveland all over.
He could be another Grover Cleveland. Yeah, I mean, the story goes that Grover Cleveland's wife, and let me see if I remember this correctly, Grover Cleveland, the last president to get married in the White House, I think he was 54 and she was 22.
My hero.
Yeah. She said to the staff as she was leaving, "Don't change any of the furniture. We're going to be back in 4 years."
Wow.
Right.
And yeah, there's a mic drop for you right there. And,
right.
And it happened. So yeah, but yeah, back to Tilden, you know, in 1876, I mean, I guess he could see how bad this could get. And I don't know if you guys want to go there or not. I mean, I have to say, I've been teaching for 30 years. I've been in this subject for a long time. Did I ever think that we'd get to a point where you'd have more and more people go, the country's going to split up? Well, there's worse things that could happen, Okay. if we really can't get along, okay, we can go that direction. I mean, you actually see people in a straight face saying, yeah, okay, maybe that's it. We're just too big to all get along with this anymore.
Right.
And it is pretty scary, you know.
Well, I know here in Colorado, we
Yeah.
had 8 counties, starting with Weld County, where Congressman Ken Buck is the representative. They basically said there's no way for us to counteract the liberalism of Fort Collins, Boulder, and Denver. And so we think we would be better off as our own state. They sued to try to get their own state, and the state Supreme Court shot them down. I know that some people have vowed to bring that back and try, once the Republicans get control of the legislature here in, probably 4, 8, 12 years, however long it takes. But the thing is, ideas like that hardly ever go away. But, I can see where people in the South and in the Midwest, I mean, if you look at and I just did this the other day, took a look at the current polls in the Electoral College. There are 24 states that are pretty firmly in the Republican camp, and they're basically an L. You go straight down from North Dakota down to Texas and over to the East Coast, and all those are Republican states. So I could see all those guys looking to form their own country at some point.
Well, yeah, and I think some of that perpetuates from the top, and the fact that President Trump continues to say, he did it yesterday, he did it again today, to say basically, if I don't win, I'm not accepting the results.
Right.
Which I find it funny that's his ruling, that mail-in ballots are a complete fraud. They're terrible. But if somehow he were to win, God forbid, but if he were to win on election night, something tells me he's probably going to say, case closed, no reason to count any more ballots or anything. And everything was safe and fair and wonderful. And so, we can't have a system where it's going to be hard for our government. If Joe Biden wins, it's going to be extremely difficult to govern, I believe, because of the divisions. And part of that's because there's no conscience in the other party to draw back. I feel like that there's been so much advance to extremism that they kind of, with the Tea Party in 2009, 2010, it created an element where there's no turning back. And you don't see the leadership like you had from Tilden or like you had from the Republicans during FDR's term when he was passing the New Deal, where they recognized that they could block those things and block those programs if they wanted to, but they recognized for the good of the country, we needed to come out of the Great Depression, or the way that LBJ recognized that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act needed to be passed. And it was high time, but he also recognized that there was going to be electoral consequences to that, but it was a matter of country over party. And we don't see a lot of that today.
Yeah.
Jeff, you had another, besides 1876, I think you had another, was it 1892?
1888.
1888, I was close.
That was, but really in a way that was, I don't know how substantial that one really was, but that was Grover Cleveland and Benjamin Harrison. And so Cleveland ran 3 straight times for the Democrats. He won, lost, and then he won. And so he did win the popular vote 3 straight times. So he did win the popular vote in that case. I can't remember if it was a majority. That was a time where you would have other third parties like the Greenback Party and the Populist Party and the Prohibition Party, and they would pick off some votes here and there. It seems like there was really not, and I haven't, like I said, I'm not really that well versed in that election, but there didn't seem to be any complaints about it, any opportunity to say, look, this is not the way it should be, and let's fight it. But there also didn't seem to be any shenanigans about it. It just broke down that way. And I mean, that is always the situation for the Electoral College. If you barely win in some states, And then the guy who ultimately loses, or woman, as we saw in 2016, wins big some other places, then that's where you get this distortion. And, at the root of criticizing the Electoral College, because I thought about this as well when I started looking over some different things about the Electoral College. I don't think I've ever read a pro-Electoral College essay. I think I ever have. I have read anti-Electoral College essays. That's what I've read.
Right.
So I think G kind of mentioned that what those essays say is, it's terrible. It's a really bad system. No one would start off with this system, but if we got rid of it, oh my gosh, it would be so horrible. It would be so horrible if we actually elected a president by a national ballot. Wouldn't that be just terrible? So, that's their argument. And so, I mean, I thought about this, that, it's like seeing a fitness guru who tells you that vitamin D is so great. Well, if vitamin D is so great, of course, the fitness guru is going to tell everybody to take vitamin D. Everyone needs to take vitamin D.
Right.
If the Electoral College is so great, why are we not saying other countries ought to use this, right?
Right.
And no one uses this, of course, right? And
Right.
like I said, you could bring people back from the 1780s and they would say, you're still using this in that case. So all these countries that we blow up and then we try to rebuild, why did we ever say to them, hey, try this Electoral College?
So Jeff, that brings up the question, how then do we get rid of it? Wouldn't it take a constitutional amendment? And the Republicans aren't, because they're the beneficiary the last few years of this thing, right? They show no inclination for wanting to get rid of it. And currently they control more legislatures than the Democrats. So wouldn't it take a constitutional amendment to get rid of this thing?
Yeah, I think that's the way you have to go. I mean, if you want to go around, so really it's going to be maybe impossible to get rid of it. But at this point, as long as I think we want to maintain our system, then yes, you have to go through the Constitutional Convention to do it. My concern is, just like we were talking about, as people say, let's go ahead and break away from the system. People have to believe that this is a legitimate system and that the people who win deserve to be there. Voting systems are not really in place for the people who win. They're in place for the people who lose, who are willing to accept the outcome.
Right.
And how are people going to accept this outcome if it's going to be the third time now in 20 years that we have this situation? And some of the things that really kind of, it just becomes kind of almost a common statement. Maybe you guys have heard this, and I always think, can you stop and think about what you're saying? I heard two guys who are really left of center on their podcast saying, well, Biden's got to win by more than 5%. And you're going, well, wait a minute, 5% is a fairly substantial vote. And that's more votes than Trump, and he probably ends up with the majority, and you're still saying that's not good enough?
Yeah.
What kind of system is that? When you're looking at the Democratic candidate going, hey, if he doesn't win by 7 or 8 points, then it doesn't count.
Yeah, I think Nate Silver had some numbers like that where it was, I think if he wins by 5 and 6%, he only has a 50-50 shot of winning the presidency.
Right.
And you go, what kind of system are we in where if somebody wins by 5 percentage points, that they don't win the presidency?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm personally in favor of getting rid of the Electoral College, but I recognize that, if the anomaly is very close, if it's within a few percentage points, I get it. But I also think that it is ripe for when the percentage points are close like that, it's ripe for some issues to happen. And we already know that Russia meddled in the last election. We know from reports that they were able to hack. And the way it's always been explained in the articles I've read is they've said they got to the election boxes in some cases. And they said, well, they didn't change any votes. They didn't change any votes. And that's the lyric that I always heard, which made me think, what if they added votes? What if they took people who were on the rolls that didn't vote and added enough votes for that to be able to flip the Electoral College, because they would know the math that would need to take place for that. This is not
Yeah.
this is not G and D out here in the back of my Toyota driving around stuffing boxes. I mean, this is a sophisticated way to manipulate the system. So I agree. It's I think it's worth reforming any way that we can, and hopefully, my sincere hope is that the election turns out the correct way for us, and by that, that Joe Biden wins, that there's enough of a majority to enact some changes, and hopefully that groups like the Lincoln Project, the Republicans Against Trump, that they can band together, and if it's not within the Republican Party, form another party that's a conservative alternative, though, that believes in the rule of law. And that's what it comes down to for me.
Well, just today we had a group, I think it was 500 or so former military and government officials, a lot of them Republicans, came out and said Trump is unfit to serve his second term as president. So, those groups. Jeff, have you had a chance to play with the electoral math for this year's election? And if so, what are you seeing?
I haven't really, looked it over that much. I mean, I would think that, some of the things that I've read is, and I guess I can kind of understand this. This is the Electoral College, so you're going to go where you think you can make a difference in winning in terms of the Biden campaign, and that he's going to focus on 6 states. And so, when we look at, I know Dee remembers talking about this election in 1960, where Nixon made the pledge that he was going to go to every state. And so, he's freezing in South Dakota like a week before the election. And, so he can keep that pledge, and Kennedy's focusing on the main states. So the Electoral College does mean you're looking at certain states. So if there were in fact 6 states, I've got to think that if he wins the 3 that, most people thought Hillary was certainly going to win because Obama had won them, and that was Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And of course, she ends up losing Michigan by 10,000 votes, smaller than the town of Miami here, and the whole state. So I would think it's those 3, then probably maybe Ohio. I did see that Ohio is very competitive right now. I would assume Florida, because Florida seems to be always in the mix. So, that's 5. And then the 6th one, perhaps North Carolina.
Well, the last poll I saw showed Biden with a 7-point lead in North Carolina. I think they're saying, is it New Hampshire or Vermont? One of the New England states is supposed to be a battleground state.
Yeah, New Hampshire has
split, right?
People forget sometimes that there's in the New England states, particularly Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, there's large rural populations, and so you see a lot of rural city divides as far as votes go. New Hampshire, it could be in play, but the last polls I saw on it was that Biden had a pretty good lead. There is one congressional district in Maine. Maine, much like Nebraska, allows their congressional districts to vote independently. So you could win. Trump has a potential pickup opportunity in rural Maine, but the congressional district around Omaha in Nebraska is also a potential pickup for Biden. Another state that's in play this time, which from what I've read has Republican operatives pulling their hair out, is Arizona.
Right.
They've got a really weak senator who is running for election for the first time. She was appointed. She lost last time to Kirsten Sinema in the election for Jeff Flake's seat. And then when Senator John McCain passed away, then she was appointed to fill his seat. So she lost the statewide election, was appointed to fill his seat. And now she drew Mark Kelly. And Mark Kelly, from what I've seen in the polls, I don't want to jinx anything, but he's running away with that seat.
Yeah, he's got to be very solid.
in Arizona, and likewise, the last poll I saw had Biden up by 3 or 4 points there.
Yeah.
And
So according to Nate, he's Mark Kelly has an 8-point lead in that race, and Nate Silver, and then Biden has a almost 4-point lead in the presidential poll there.
Yeah, so I don't think they anticipated having to play there. Another state which Democrats keep wishing and hoping for is Texas, the G-man's birth state.
Right.
And I don't know if we're comfortable yet calling it a purple state, but I will tell you it definitely has an effect on the election, because if Trump has to campaign there in order to sustain it, because if Biden wins Texas, to me, with Texas, California, and New York, plus his other states, that's pretty doggone close to winning. And so Trump has to win Texas. He has to hold Texas. But more importantly, even if he doesn't win, if it's close enough that he has to campaign, you've got 3 major media markets in Texas that are super expensive: Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and then Austin, San Antonio. And having to play in those markets and buy TV can really be draining on a campaign, especially one that has spent a lot of their campaign cash paying for the president's daughters-in-laws and sons to be on staff.
Right.
Yeah.
The current poll shows Trump with a 2-point lead in Texas. Ironically, he's got the same 2-point lead in Arkansas, which is a firm red state. So, yeah, there's a lot of things about this election that are, kind of eyebrow raising in terms of the numbers and where they are. And there's, we're about 38 days out. Is that where we are, Chris?
Right.
From the election. And so we'll see if they hold. Traditionally things tighten up the last couple of weeks. And so we'll see if these polls actually hold, and if the Democrat wave that people are talking about actually materializes. But so far, it's not looking bad. And a while back, Dee, you said that Biden might have trouble governing. Well, I think if the Dems take the Senate, which I expect. So as you know, I had a chance to look at the Senate races not too long ago, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seats currently firmly in the flipping over to the Dems. And that's plenty, that's more than they need to take control of the Senate. And then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 states that are a toss-up. So Alaska, Georgia, the Ossoff race in Georgia, Kansas, Mississippi of all states, Montana, and South Carolina all are in toss-up. That means they're within 1 or 2 points of flipping to the Dems.
Did you have Alaska in that list? I wasn't listening.
I did. I have Alaska in that list.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, that's a race that was kind of, when we did our Senate podcast a while back, it was we left it off. It was a little bit under the radar.
Now, surely in Alaska they have someone running other than Mike Gravel, don't they? He's not their candidate anymore.
I know he was your presidential pick.
Mike Gravel has the best campaign ad ever for president. So that is the best one that's ever been out there. It's the postmodern ad for sure. In that case, exactly right. I don't know if you're familiar with if either G or D, or you guys are familiar with a political scientist named Rachel. I think it's Bitcover, Bitcover. I think I have her last name right. She has this really interesting theory, and I think about what I've seen posted on Facebook in different parts of Oklahoma. It's called the negative partisan theory, and she believes that it's a waste of time to think about swing voters and try to encourage people from the other party to go vote for your party. What motivates the votes is that one party is negative and fired up about the other people. They want them to lose so badly, they're willing to get out there and go vote. So I think about, and she looks at things such as yard signs, that they do matter, that the people are saying, by golly, I want everyone on my block to know how I feel about this. And I don't care if you're mad about what I put on my yard. It's my yard, and by golly, I'm going to put it out there. And unlike in 2016, there are a lot of people, and I understand that I have a skewed friendship on on Facebook, but still, there's a bunch of people posting, here's my Biden yard sign, and here I am in Yukon, Oklahoma. My neighbors are mad. I don't care. And so that is different than 2016.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah,
I
I think
wondered-
it's a totally different dynamic, and that's an interesting theory. I think we've got it's going to be an action-packed few days. We've got the 3 presidential debates coming up. We've got the vice presidential debate, which I'm looking forward to personally, and will maybe even pop some popcorn for. But, it's going to be a big night in the D household when that happens. But certainly want to do, as we say on every podcast, encourage everybody, get registered to vote, find out your state's rules. There's a lot of states that voting's already begun.
Right.
And as we've seen from the events of the last week, your rights, your right to privacy, your rights to making decisions about your own body, your right to have health care despite of a pre-existing condition, all those things are on the ballot. We knew they were already, but the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg shows that it's even more important that people get out to vote. And so go to vote.org, go to the ACLU's got some really great links, and you can find out how you can get registered to vote and make your vote count. It's not I always say voting's not, and democracy's not a spectator sport. We need everybody off the sidelines.
Yeah.
Well, and as we've said in the past, if you are registered to vote and you haven't voted in the last couple elections, make sure you check with your election commission to make sure you're still on the voter rolls.
Absolutely. Some of the things that have happened in states like Georgia with Brian Kemp and some of those where they've just taken people off the rolls. So,
Yep.
Well, it's been a great discussion. We went a little bit long tonight, but it was all great and great topics.
Great.
Dr. Jeff Birdsong, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Like I said, really enjoy the work you guys are doing.
Thanks.
Everybody take care and stay safe out there. And if you're in public and outside, make sure you wear your mask. I don't care if Trump likes it or not. So everybody have a good night. Take care.
We'll see you next time.
Good night. Yep.
Good night.
See ya.